I'm Pete Mecca. Welcome to A Veteran Story. My guest today is World War II veteran Freeman Barber. Freeman served in Europe as a crew member on a Sherman tank, and this is his story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
Though we dream of return to our loved ones, we are ready, as we have always been, to do our duty to our country, no matter what it may be.
Freeman, how long have you lived in Rockdale County?
Oh, I've been here about 25 years.
25 years, okay. Now, I'm not detecting a southern accent. Where were you born and raised, Freeman?
Oh, well, I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. That's up in the cold country.
Okay. Do you remember Pearl Harbor and the day it was bombed, and what do you remember about that day?
Oh, yeah. And my dad said, now we're in it for good.
Okay. And when did you join?
Well, I was drafted in 1943 in October.
Okay.
And then from there I went to, I went to Long Island, and then from there to,
Fort Knox. Was it Fort Knox?
Yeah, Fort Knox in
Okay.
Kentucky.
All right. So you took your training at Fort Knox.
Yep.
Okay. I understand that you were there about 2 months and caught pneumonia, and that may have saved your life. You want to explain that to the viewers?
Yeah. Well, what happened was that when I caught pneumonia, they put me in the hospital, and
How long were you there?
4 months, and there was a whole bunch of us, and I made it through, and then they sent me down to Camp Polk, Louisiana, and that was in May of 1940. Oh, that was in 1944.
Okay. And I remember that you mentioned that it may have saved your life catching pneumonia.
Well, what happened, and I didn't hear about this until later, that many of the fellows that I was in the Army with were put in as replacements to armored divisions. And they went in D-Day, and what happened, the LSTs dropped them off in the water, and they were supposed to be able to stay high enough out of the water so
You're
they
talking
could drive
about the
the
Sherman
ship.
tanks.
Yeah, Sherman
That
tanks.
flotation car,
Yeah.
okay.
No, they didn't have any flotation on them.
Oh,
No, they were supposed to drop off into the sandy bottom and drive up on the
okay.
Sand. And so they didn't realize that there were holes there. So when they dropped the tanks off, they just went plunk, and they landed in the bottom, and they lost a lot of men that way. Because you can't get out of a tank easily. There's not that much room.
Okay.
And then when I was down there, they said, oh, well, you're here. We are off maneuvers. And by the way, we're leaving. And I said, oh, okay, well, yeah. Where are we going? Oh, they don't know. So anyway, we were off by train, and we went up and left from New York City area. And we went over on the Marine Devil, which was a very interesting trip. Everybody got sick. Well, I wasn't sick, but I was close to it. And it was one time I got away from KP too, because I went around to see my sergeant, and he told me I was on KP, but he was green, and he was sick. And I looked down and I said, Sarge, I don't feel very good. He says, don't worry about KP. That's the first time he's ever said that to me. So I was lucky going over. And we had a few situations where they said, well, we got to have a check, you got to come in. We're going to have an emergency drill. And they told us to get our life jackets on and stand at the rail. And we did. And this was in the middle of an Atlantic storm. So it was up and down. You could hear the ship go up. And all of a sudden you'd hear a thunk when it landed. And it's not very encouraging.
How many crew members on a Sherman tank?
Tell me.
How many crew members on a Sherman tank?
There's 5 crew members. And the Sherman tank is 30 tons of 450 horsepower engine. And that thing would go, not too fast, but it'll go almost anywhere. And we had 5 crew members. You had your driver, who treated his tank just like his own pet. Nobody else could drive it. And we had a bow gunner who was supposed to take over, who sat next to him in the front. And his job was as a machine gunner or to take over from the driver if he was shot or hurt or couldn't drive. And then we had the gunner who sat behind this bow gunner up in the turret, and he was up a ways. And then behind him stood the tank commander, and he was in control of everything. And then I was on the left-hand side, and I was what they call a loader, but I was also the radio man. And it was very interesting, when we got to Europe, the radios didn't work. So I was mainly a loader, and whatever they needed done, why they usually called on me, because I could get out probably the easiest of any of them. And sometimes it was hard to get up through the turret, because it was only so big, and I was only so big, you know, and you get...
Well, the tank was very noisy, and I know the communication was bad inside the tank. So how did you guys communicate to the driver as to where he was supposed to go and make a turn? Tell the viewers that.
That's an interesting question. I've had that before, because some people said, well, you can't hear much in there. And we were supposed to have earphones, but they didn't work either. So we tied a rope to the driver. I sat behind him, and we tied a rope to his right shoulder, left shoulder, and then what we said was, if we kick you in the back, you go faster. And then to go slower, we'll push on you a little bit. And so, or we'll pull back. So go right, you pull on the right rope. Go left, you pull on the left rope. And he had handles like on a tractor or one of these big dozers where you just pull, go right on the left, or go left on the left and right on the right. And automatic, no automatic transmission. Had to shift by hand. It was interesting.
Explain to the viewers an expansion device called the Chinese finger.
Oh, well, that's interesting. You should ask, because one of the things that we wondered about is where you're going to put the shells. And so in our training one day, they said, okay, they're under the turret. And we looked at that, and the turret leaves no room for anything except over in a couple of corners. And it's set down on a gear that you rotate your gun on the gear. And when you look in the tank, you'll see a sort of a metal floor. But the floor lifts up, and you put your shells in the fuse side, not the fuse side, but the back side of the shell in there. That's the one with the firing mechanism in it. And you put that towards the floor down in there. And it's what holds it was like the old Chinese finger, where you put your finger in this little grip,
yeah,
and it holds it. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, once in a while, they would loosen up. And we had probably 60 shells in the bottom. And so when they would lift them up, set them down in there, you'd make sure that they were settled. And most of the time they stayed. But occasionally, and this is unfortunately only occasionally, they would work themselves up, because the tank vibrates a lot when it was going. It was very noisy and rough. Mm-hmm. And Chinese fingers would loosen a little bit, and the fuse would come up. The whole shell would come up out of the finger, Chinese finger. And all of a sudden, if you rotated the turret, you'd hear this click, 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 and everybody'd say, oh, hold it. And they'd say, well, yeah, what's going on? He said, got to lift the floor up. So we lifted the floor up, and here's one shell or two, maybe 3, would raise up 2 or 3 inches to hit the platform on the bottom. So when you rotated it, it was hitting the fuses. Well, now, theoretically, there was supposed to be bore safe. In other words, the shell had to be going down the bore, right, to have the fuse activated. Now, as we trust everything else, we said, oh, weren't we lucky? But who knows, if that shell had gone off, we'd have gone right up.
I understand that.
Pardon?
I understand that a few Shermans were lost because of that.
I'm sure that there were a few lost, either through other shells hitting them and then just exploding.
Oh, me.
But, yeah.
All right, you stopped in England and then sailed to France. Where did you land in France?
We landed on the Har. They had a rocky coast, and they brought in an LST. But this one time, it really put the ramp down. We drove off, and we did pretty well. But
What's the weather like?
oh, it was a little bit in the wintertime. It looked like it was going to snow. And they said, oh no, keep on going, follow the tank in front of you. And so we just did what we were told. And so we kept going. And so finally, after we got down to a certain point, they said, okay, now line up. And so we lined the tanks up all neatly. They said, oh, we got to get our ammunition now. So they brought trucks along with ammunition, and they had everything in a clover leaf. They had 3 shells in a clover leaf with wood around it. So they dumped them off. Well, they didn't dump them off. They gave us, each one of us had to carry one on each shoulder, and that's what, yeah, a good 75 pounds or more, whatever. And we would put them in the tank. So the guys were starting to look up in the sky, and it looked like it was going to snow, and it started to spit a little bit. And some of the southern fellows says, oh, you know, what's that stuff up there? And I said, you've never been north? No. And I said, well, that's going to be snow. And they said, oh. And then we stood around and they got cold. So they took some of the wood off the shells that was piled up, this trash now, and built fires. So we had big bonfires going beside the tanks. And all of a sudden this Jeep came by, and this major stood up in the back of the Jeep and, hey, you SOBs, put those fires out. And everybody said, why? And he looked around and, are you questioning me, soldier? He said, no, but we gotta keep warm. And he says, put the fires out. He says, see that light on the horizon over there? We looked over in the horizon. It looked like the, what do they call it? Nights when they see the northern lights.
Northern lights.
It was all lit up, and it was red. And he says, that's German artillery firing. We said, oh. And of course, we'd never been in combat before. So they put the fires out, and the guys stood there and they shivered, and he said, hey, it's starting to snow.
Okay. Compare the Sherman to the German Panzer tanks.
Well, we had an advantage in that we were faster. They were slow. We had gasoline engines, they had a diesel engine. And that had some advantage to us because they had to warm them up in the morning before they could drive them. But they were much better armor than we had. And they were better armed too, unfortunately. They usually carried an 88 millimeter cannon, sometimes a bigger howitzer, but most of the time about an 88. That's the big one. That's the tank that everybody was afraid of.
Now, I have heard that a Sherman, when it fired on a German Panzer, that the shells would bounce off the Panzer. Is that
yes,
correct?
unfortunately that happened. And it was very interesting because when you went and said, well, we're firing at a German tank, and somebody said, hey, you hit it. Oh, the shell bounced off. And we had nothing that would penetrate their armor.
Well, then how did you defeat a German Panzer?
By our own ingenuity mostly, or good luck, or bad luck, because what would happen is we would think about the thing, and unfortunately a German mind says, okay, yes sir, I'll do it. And our mind is, gee, hey, Lieutenant, couldn't we do it a different way? So we usually got behind them or alongside them. And we were fast enough to get ahead of them. They didn't move that fast. If they could get up to maybe 10 miles an hour, I'd say that was fast. We could do 35. And if you really got urgent, and I've gone up to 45 miles an hour one,
wow.
Downhill. Oh, gosh.
I heard the German 88 anti-aircraft gun was an awesome weapon to use against our airplanes, but they would also level that barrel and use it to get tanks.
Yes. I think most of the 88s were brought into the battle for that purpose. They would just lower them down, and the speed of the bullet, of the projectile, is so much faster than the 75s we had. I mean, it was a shoot, and it's gone. I mean, and very accurate. And these Germans really used that to an advantage.
Okay.
They would put it in a place where we wouldn't think they would put it, and sometimes we'd outthink them. And that's where we got around behind or
Okay.
alongside. And it would go right through. And
Tell the viewers, when you crossed the Rhine River, we lost a lot of tanks. Can you tell your experiences about crossing the Rhine River?
oh yeah, that was interesting. When we were going up the Rhine, the Germans were very much determined that we weren't going to cross the Rhine River. So how we got to the Rhine is a longer story, but we got up to the Rhine at the town called Rheinberg. It's one of the few cities I remember. And the Germans held half of it, and we held half of it in one part. And so we pulled up into next to a house, and since I was the forager of the group, they said, "Oh, Barber, go find something for us to eat." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. You know, we're the Germans are out there." And they said, "Don't worry about it. We'll let you know if we need you." So anyway, I entered the house, and I was looking around. It was very empty. And then the telephone rang, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And being a curious person, I answered the phone. I heard this German voice on the other end of the line saying, "Hey," and he started calling out numbers. And I said, "Nine, nicht verstehe," and hung the phone up. And so when I went back to the tank, they said, "Barber, what were you doing in there so long?" I said, "Well, I had to answer the phone." They said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, get up here. We were getting some mortar fire." And all of a sudden, there was no more mortar fire. And evidently, what it was they had a spotter in the house, and he was supposed to tell them where the tanks were so that they could use the mortar fire.
So he needed you to call in the coordinates of the tanks.
Well, well, evidently he was asked. That was what he was asking on the words he was using. Yes, and I understood enough German to understand that he was asking me a question that I didn't want to answer, so I just hung up.
And I bet that was one upset German officer.
What imagine? Well, the mortar rounds didn't fall anywhere close to us, so I guess it worked. You don't know. It's wartime.
Yeah.
And when you're in a situation like that, you just act. You don't think. And that's where the training comes in.
What were the Sherman losses crossing that Rhine River that you told me about?
Well, what happened was that we had a situation where they wanted to go in through this town, Rheinberg. And so they said, "Well, we're going in and we're going to pass this big factory." It wasn't in pieces. It was still there. It was like a storage area. And so there was a big field out here, and it was all plowed. And of course, that's very suspicious because the Germans might have planted mines. So we were to go down the road. And so somebody said, "Oh, wait a minute, we got to go back and get gas," or whatever it was. So we went back, and they said, "Okay, now, tonight, we're going to have a night maneuver. We're going down against the Germans at night." And I said, "Uh-oh," because in a tank, you can't hear, you can't see all that well, so you're a dead duck. And you make a lot of noise, and so and it's big enough. It's 30 tons sitting out there, 6 feet off. Well, the chassis is 6 feet off the ground. The turret's up another 3 or 4 feet, and so I'm thinking, what's going to happen? Well, fortunately, we had a tank dozer. That was a dozer blade on the front of the tank in our company, and we were it. We were the tank. And also, we had the tank commander's tank in our company. So we were in reserve. So they sent A and B companies up. I was the C company. And we just stayed back. We were probably at least a mile or maybe 2 miles away. But they sent them in that night. And we heard a lot of noise, and we wondered what happened. We actually didn't know too much until the next morning, and they said, "Oh, now we're going down the road. We're going into the Rheinberg." And so we started down, and here were the tanks. All these tanks. There's 47 tanks they lost.
Sherman tanks.
Sherman tanks.
47 boys, 47 crews.
Well, some of the crews made it out. I don't know how many. Some of this I learned after the war, and I know that some of them got out because they came to our reunions, but not many left. No.
Explain how the Germans use haystacks to cover their gun pits and automatic weapons.
Well, see, one of the problems that the tank has. You can't see and you can't hear. And you can see out, but it's restricted. And so anytime we had German soldiers that were single, or singular, or small groups, that was bad because they could attack a tank from the side or the rear and you wouldn't see them. And so we would we had our own infantry that usually went along with us. This one time, we were going up to a town called Blankburg. And so it was beautiful. The apple blossoms are on the trees and everything. We were going along and I looked down and here's this German popping up out of a spider hole or a foxhole down here. And he had a Panzerfaust, which is like a
rocket.
Like the rockets they have today. And they could do some damage to the tank. And he's popped up out of there and I thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? All of a sudden, one of the guys that was with the infantry beside us shot him. Well, we were relieved and we said, hey, thank you guys. And so we went up the road a ways. This is an interesting one because when we got up the road about halfway to the city, it was on a hill, and it was a resort area for the Nazi SS, and we got halfway up the hill. All of a sudden, the whole town, they had bed sheets out the window. They were surrendering, white bed sheets. So we stopped. About 5 minutes after we stopped, the bed sheets would disappear. So we went a little further. And pretty soon the bed sheets came out again. And we stopped. And then they disappeared. We found out that they didn't have many soldiers there, but they had some papers. So the Burgermeister, which is the mayor, was throwing them in the town well while we were proceeding to wait for him to come up the hill. And
so they were delaying you so they could get rid of sensitive information.
We were nice guys. We said, you surrender? Okay, so we'll let you surrender. We won't blow you to bits. And meanwhile, they're saying, hey, these idiots gave us time, so they threw it in the well. They fished them out. They got them later.
What about those, you told me something about haystacks, that the Germans would hide under haystacks?
Well, what they would do, they build a little fortification, a little pillbox, and they put a machine gunner in it. And they cover them up with hay, because the haystacks in Germany, in Europe, are pyramidal.
Okay.
Right? Whatever. They're pyramids. And what we did, we came along and fired, and as we machine gunned them, if the bullets bounced out, they hit a pillbox. If they didn't, it was no guns or anything there. So we fired at this one, the bullets bounced off. So I said, hey, I started to shove a shell into the 75 millimeter. We couldn't get it out.
In other words, the shell stuck in the...
Sort of cocked going down into the chamber. And it weighs 25 pounds, and we couldn't get it out. So we had a method of doing that. They said, okay, Barber. And said, you go out and take the bell housing. They had a bell housing on the end of a rod. You're supposed to go out, push this rod into the barrel, push the shell out, and then after you got the shell inside, then you put it aside. So I went out, and I'm hearing this bing, 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 bing all around me. They're machine guns firing, and I'm hearing these bullets on the tank. Now, being 18, well, I guess I was turned 20 years old. I don't remember that I was scared to death, but I needed to get that shell out of there. And so I got it out, and I think I threw the pole up on the tank and started to get up on the front. On the front, there's like a little fender. And on the fender was a box that usually used to have a cover on it, and it was supposed to hold tools. And somehow somebody took the cover off, threw it away, but we put straw in it and we put our eggs in there, because I would forage for the group. And when I foraged, I'd find eggs, hams, whatever, because I was not only interested and curious, but I was always hungry. So anyway, I put the eggs in there. So when I got up on the tank, I moved. I could move a lot faster than I could today. I jumped up on that tank. I put my foot right in the middle of the eggs and jumped up on the tank. I got in, the hatch was open. I jumped down through the hatch. The first thing I heard is, Barber, you SOB, you stepped in our eggs. What are we going to have to eat for tomorrow? And I said, well, they were shooting at me. I don't care. You stepped in our food. And Well, they were meant it as a joke, I guess. They didn't kill me, I didn't kill them, so we're all set.
I understand that you dodged an '88 disaster on a mountain road.
Oh, that
And
one.
tell the viewers how you kept your head, literally.
Well, what happened was, I always was up out of the tank if I could get there, because I like to look and see things. I was very curious. And so we're going along this mountain road. It's again up where the SS had all their resorts and all. And they had a mountain going up this way. It was grassy going up, but then there were a lot of trees up here. Down here, again, kind of grassy, and then a few trees. And then as we went by, I noticed there was a white house over here, and there was a stream down there. It's in almost the summertime. It's beautiful over there. And so we're going along. Boy, it's a beautiful day. And then I noticed there was movement down by the house. I said, "Oh my God, there's an '88 down there. Whitey, Whitey!" My tank commander, I shook him and I said, "Hey, Whitey, look down there. There's a '88." So they started to traverse the gun around. Meanwhile, I looked, and all of a sudden there was this, and that's about all you hear if you're in front of an '88. And I saw some dirt fly up here on the bank, and I remembered the Germans go over, under, and on. And all of a sudden I heard a down below on this bank. There was a big cloud of dirt. They were all shooting anti-tank rounds at us. And I thought, oh God. Then I heard a thump, and I saw this blue light coming at me. And I just paralyzed. And then I heard this funk over here in the bank. He missed the top of my helmet about that much. And whew, that was one. But being 20 years old, we just went on. It's interesting how you face things like that.
So did another tank take care of the '88?
Yeah, another tank up ahead, swiveled their gun around and fired on it.
Freeman, you guys were pretty much nomads. You were like gypsies. You bounced around to different units, the 35th, the 99th, the 8th Army. I think you put up with General Patton for a little while. Yeah. And I believe you ran into the British troops.
Oh, yeah.
Tell about running into the British troops and what were they doing?
Well, basically what we did, we went into Holland, then we came down, and that's where the Patton was up in that end of it a little bit. So we all of a sudden, I looked around and I saw other tanks, and I said, "Oh, that's Patton." And somebody said, "Yeah, his guts in our blood." Yeah. And so we rolled with that for a while. All of a sudden, somebody came up and said, "Okay, we're turning up here," and they'd have somebody out, down this way. And so because we had no maps. When we went to Europe, we got our maps off the German soldiers. And so we never knew where we were. Somebody asked me after the war, "What towns were you in?" I don't know. I can tell you where I went, but I don't know what towns I went through in many cases, except the ones like Rheinberg. And then from there, the next one we hit, we were going down the road. This was in Holland too, on the edge of it. And we saw these two British soldiers down here. And they were in a Bren gun carrier, which is a machine gun carrying like a motorcycle almost. They were sitting down there, a couple of them, and they had a little fire going. I'm thinking, there's artillery fire over the hill. They were down behind this about 12-foot high hill, and we could see the flashes over there. And all of a sudden this guy comes up and sort of raises up a little bit, and raises his teacup up, and he says, "Tea up, mate." It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was having tea when there was a war going on. And then, so I said, "Yeah, but there's a war. Tea up, mate." And so I just said, "Boy, we got some crazy people here," and we went on.
Tell the viewers about your open ride in an Oldsmobile to a Russian wedding.
Well, that's a good story. It's true. My Whitey, my tank commander, was second generation Serbian, so she could speak some Russian, whatever language it was, he could speak. Sometimes very angrily. But anyway, he came up to me and he says, "Barber, we're going to a Russian wedding." I said, "Whitey, where is a Russian wedding in the middle of Germany?" He says, "Oh, I know one." I said, "Whitey, how are we going to get there?" He says, "I found an Oldsmobile." I said, "An Oldsmobile?" He says, "Yeah, look." He came out, he showed me. It was a 4-door Oldsmobile that they cut the whole top off, windshield and everything, and put seats in the back for soldiers. And I said, Whitey, does it run? Oh yeah, we found a battery for it. And I thought, well, what do we do now? Well, I'm curious, so I said, okay, Whitey, we'll go. You know where it is? Well, he said, it's down this road. I said, how far? And he said, oh, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles. And I said, how do you know when you get there? He says, well, we'll know. It's a Russian wedding. And I said, oh? And I said, yeah, come on, let's go. So we went down there, drove up, and we came to a stockade, literally, and the gates were closed. And I said, Whitey, are we supposed to be here? He says, no, don't worry. So somebody came up here, dressed, he was the lapid individual, but he was happy. And he opened the gate and he said, come on in, and said something in Russian to Whitey, and Whitey says, oh, we're supposed to go in. So we drove in through there, and they parked the car, and this Russian came up to Whitey and said, oh yeah, you got to come here. And I said, where do we go? He says, just follow me. Do what they do. And I said, Whitey, what's going on? So he says, no, come on with me. We went in this big room. It was a big one, and it was the community dining hall, and they had the big table, like picnic tables out there.
What kind of stockade was this? Was this like a work camp?
It was a work camp.
Okay.
It was a DP camp. Okay. It's where the Germans took the people from Poland and all over the countries they conquered and put them in, and they worked them. And if you didn't work, you died because you didn't eat. When you worked, you ate. But these people survived. There's a whole bunch of them. There was, at the table, probably over 100.
Okay.
And they came in, and they were happy. They had a wedding. And so I said, what do I do now? He said, Whitey, just follow me. Or Whitey said to me, Freeman, just follow me. He really didn't use the name Freeman. He used the name Barber. And he said, Barber, follow me. Do what I do. I said, Whitey? And he said, no, sit down. So I sat at the table. So this Russian came up. He had a 5-gallon water can. And I said, what are we going to have with that? And they had these glasses on the table. I'll swear that they were a foot high. And so I said, well, what's happening? He says, do what they do. And I said, what do you mean? He said, watch them. And they had, in the table, they had a can, looked like the old-fashioned Crisco can. It was about that high, about that big around. And right next to it was a big loaf of black bread. And I don't mean brown, it was black. And so I said, Whitey, what do we do? He says, do what they do. So I said, okay. And so all of a sudden, this guy hoists the 5-gallon water can up, pours this drink into my glass. Not a little bit, it was up to the top. And I'm thinking, oh boy, what's going to happen now? And then he filled Whitey's up, and then they shoved the bread down, slid it down the table, and Russian broke off a piece of bread. Whitey did. Barber, come on. I broke off a piece of black bread. And he says, now watch what they do. And I watched them, and my eyes bulged. I looked over. They would take off a piece of bread, dip it in this. It was bacon grease in those cans. Dip it in the bacon grease, take a big bite, chew a couple times, take the glass of drink, and down the hatch. And
Set you on fire?
well, I think the first time I just, that was it.
Are we talking Russian vodka?
I think it was Russian vodka. What they made it out of, I have no idea. If I'd been 2 drinks before that, I probably would have questioned it. After 2 or 3 drinks. And so we sat there for about an hour and drank. They didn't just drink and then talk. They were drinking. And Whitey said, do what they do. And he kept on that way. Pretty soon it was, do what they do. And so I looked over, and Whitey had quite a few. And I said, Whitey, how you doing? Oh, okay. And so I said, I think it's getting a little dark out there. It's going to be, and so I said, Whitey, we got to go. No response. So I shook him. It was like shaking a dummy. And I said, Whitey, we got to move. Nothing. Nothing. I think he was just breathing. I don't know. So after about 3 or 4 times, I said, this guy is stiff. And I'd never seen a stiff drunk before. And I thought, oh my God, what do we do now? It's up to me to drive back, because Whitey drove down. And so I motioned a couple of Russians and I said, some help? So one big Russian on one side and one big on the other side, they picked him up. And I'll swear that he was in the same position when they put him in the car as he was in the chair. His legs didn't bend or anything. They just put him in the other seat. And I found the keys and we got in, I started up. These two guys jumped in the back. And I said, well, yeah, you want to go down? We just want to make sure you know the way. I mean, in sign language, I didn't understand what they were saying. So we started out. Now this road again had a bank on this side going back and a bank down this way to a lake or a creek or a river. And so I'm driving along and I didn't feel it at first, but I was driving up the bank and down on the road again. So I did this 3 or 4 times and the guys in the back speaking Russian said, "Pomalo, pomalo." They hit me on the back, "Pomalo, pomalo," which means, and evidently in Russian means to slow down. And so I just kept on driving, and I really was going up the bank. Now this is only what I can remember now. And I went up and down. All of a sudden, I came down at the bottom and I stopped. All of a sudden, these two guys jumped out and ran back to where the party was. Here I am on the road, didn't know where I was. Now the next morning, they told me that I drove back and that I stood guard. I don't remember a bit. I think it took Whitey 3 days to sober up, I swear.
I think that was your last Russian wedding during the war?
During the war, yeah.
Okay, and Freeman, I understand that you ran into some green champagne. What in the world is green champagne?
Well, it tastes pretty good. What happened, we were going along on our train in 48/8 now. This is I don't know how many men we had in them. We had straw on the ground, on the floor, and we dangled our legs out like a bunch of hobos on the sides of the train. And so we're going along and the train stopped going the same way on another track, right beside us. And our train was stopped. So you know what that is with soldiers. They had to find something to do. So they said, "Oh, let's look, see what's up there." And we went up, one of the fellows went up on the top of the other train and said, "Oh, we got some big barrels of champagne up here." And, you know, of course, great roar, "Champagne!" So everybody got out there, dumped the water. We were given 2 5-gallon cans of water to take us on our journey on the train. We dumped the water out and they filled them up with champagne. So I said, "Hey, that's great." And then
Green champagne?
green champagne. Well, what happened was that one of the guys says, "Champagne, that's not like champagne I tasted." And it had no bubbles in it yet. And so somebody said, "Oh, it isn't, it's green champagne, it hasn't been aged yet." So the guy said, "So?" And we're drinking. It tasted good. It was very sweet and good. And we hadn't tasted anything like this in a long time. So green champagne, it went down easy. You didn't feel anything. And so we had our 5-gallon, well, I had 10 gallons of green champagne. I outsmarted them. I didn't tell you how I outsmarted them. But they would, it was awful. You wouldn't want to be there.
Okay.
But anyway, what we did, another train had gone by previously, and I said, "There's a better thing than sitting in this dirty straw." So this buddy of mine says, "What is it, Freeman?" And I said, "Hey, we're going to get a tarp." And he said, "Where are you going to get a tarp?" I said, "See that train's right next to us? There's a Sherman tank up there. Every Sherman has a tarpaulin on it to cover it up from rain and stuff if you really want to." And he says, "Well, how are you going to get it?" I said, "What do you mean, how are we going to get it? Come on." So we went over, we grabbed it off, we got some rope with it, and pulled it over our train. Just before the train pulled out, I nearly missed getting home. And so he says, "What are you going to do with it now?" I said, "Watch me, lend me your knife." So I cut strips off the end of the tarp, about as wide as a canvas sling would be. Okay, what do they call it?
Hammock?
Hammock, yeah.
Okay.
And so, anyway, I cut it off, and he says, "What are you going to do with that?" And I said, "Watch me." So I took a rope, wound up the end of the
tarp?
Yeah, the tarp, and then tied it up, and each end they had a barred window about that big for the horses to breathe through and all. And they had bars on it. So I just tied one of the bars on this side, and I did the same thing with the other side and then the other side. Then I rolled up into the hammock and said, "Okay, now you do the same thing for your other end."
So you guys ended up with hammocks.
I had a hammock. My buddy had a hammock at the other end. We didn't have to be down there with the...
Very good, very good. After the war, you sailed home on the luxury liner, the Queen Elizabeth. Can you tell our viewers how many soldiers were on Queen Elizabeth?
They had 15,000. The
15,000.
whole division went back on one layer. And so they had what they did, they put us in bunks, and they put extra bunks in some of the staterooms. And we slept in 8 hours on, and the rest of the time off. You got 8 hours sleep a night. And then you had to find out what's your entertainment the rest of the time, if you had any money left. And so I didn't like that. And I tend to solve problems. So I said, there's got to be a better way. So I found a blanket, and right next to our room was the stairway, the wide stairway down into the ballroom. And so I found a place about 6 feet wide, and I brought my blanket and I slept out there on the stairway. Nobody bothered me.
Freeman, when you got home, you went back to college. You graduated from Syracuse University.
Yep.
You've worked in sales for Westinghouse, the 3M Company. You even went to sales for the Fannie Farmer Chocolate Company.
Yep.
You sold real estate, and you retired after 20 years as a locksmith.
As a locksmith.
You've had a very interesting life.
That's right.
Okay, what's your secret to a long life?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, you have to eat nutritional foods. You can't eat junk food. Second, you exercise. And the third is you got to have two things, mind-wise. A good attitude, you got to be happy, got to enjoy life, and you got to have a curiosity. You got to want to do something. And if you stay active and do that, you should live a long life.
That's great.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to mention?
No, I think that if you're happy and get along with people, that would be about it. Because if you exercise, you can eat food, you can digest it. If you eat the right food, then you don't clog up your arteries, you know.
And you mentioned something, I think we forgot about it, something about at Fort Knox, and there was a general involved.
Fort Knox?
Yeah.
And a girl?
A fire. The fire at the general's house?
Oh, that's interesting. They put me on duty one night, and I was supposed to take care of the furnaces in the barracks and the officers' quarters up here on a hill. Now, Buddy and I were supposed to do that, and these were coal furnaces. Well, he didn't have a clue as to what a coal furnace was, but I fortunately came from a home that had a coal furnace, so we said, okay. They didn't tell us anything. They said, take care of the furnace. So we went in, and we came in, and the first one we came in, we had to shake down and get the ashes out and put some, we got it going. And the next one, somebody had forgotten how to set the damper. And that sucker was red hot all around. And I thought, what do we do now? So I went up, and it happened to be the general's office, actually. It was not his home, it was his office. And knocked on the door, rattled the door. And this fellow on duty, I don't know, I think it was a sergeant, his attitude wasn't right. I think I woke him up. And anyway, I told him, hey, we don't know what to do. The furnace is glowing red. It's going to burst into flame any time. And he looked at us and says, oh? And I said, yeah, what do we do? And he said, I don't know, and slammed the door. And I thought, oh boy. So we went back and tried to help, and then my buddy went and got some help. And evidently they didn't burn down. We left after that, because we didn't want to be there when they blew up.
So you almost burned down a general's quarters.
General's quarters. I guess it was. It was a big building, and it had general on the outside. And when you're a PFC, when you see the word general, you stay as far away as you can.
Absolutely. Freeman, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for your story, and thank you for your service
thank you,
to
Pete.
our country.
Yes.
Okay.